All right, I got to sit down and watch the Deathstalker remake brought to us by Steven Kostanski, who I am a big fan of, and I constantly talk about his work and how cool I think he is as a filmmaker. He is an indie filmmaker that makes practical effects heavy throwback horror comedies. Not always comedies, though. The Void, I guess, has like no comedy that I remember in it. But for the most part, it's more like, the Frankie Fricos and the Leprechaun Returns and the Psycho Gore Man and Manborg and stuff he did with Astron 6 and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of his. And when I saw he was doing a Deathstalker, that kind of made sense to a degree, but it also kind of came out of nowhere for me. I was like, all right, Deathstalker, shit. I know about those movies. I had not seen any of them. Maybe I thought I'd seen the first one, so I went and I watched a couple of the Deathstalkers. I watched 1 and 2. I watched part of 3, but the Mystery Science Theater 3000 version, because part 3 and 4 are notoriously bad. Part 1 is fun and good, like kind of a wannabe Conan the Barbarian, but part 2 was far superior and so fun and such a good time, and that one really got me in the mood to watch this. And I was like, oh, okay, like that is very heavy comedy. And so that made me go, okay, maybe there is like a marriage to be had here with Steven Kostanski being brought in, or bringing himself in, I can only assume. So yeah, it came out today. It's on VOD for you to rent right now. And if you are a sword and sorcery fan and a practical effects fan, then you should absolutely be checking this out. So yeah, as far as like a plot synopsis goes, I mean, it's a pretty classic hero's journey, right? Deathstalker has to go up against wizards and monsters and whatever and reclaim this legendary sword to take down this impossible foe, and he meets some people along the way that he teams up with, classic kind of sword and sorcery type of stuff. And in that way, I mean, it's very basic, and I don't think that's really supposed to be the focus. It's supposed to be kind of hollow in that way, right? If it's an homage to these types of films, they never really put a lot of effort into the writing side of things. That's not to say that there's not fun writing in here with like the jokes and whatnot and the characters. There is. But it's like not some deep, rich story. That being said, there is some lore that's thrown in here. And, we all remember that Peter Jackson came from kind of a background like Steven Kostanski, who was this kind of goofy horror comedy filmmaker that made films like Brain Dead or Dead Alive, depending on where you're from, or Bad Taste, or Meet the Feebles, or The Frighteners, And he then took that and made the Lord of the Rings trilogy and eventually also the Hobbit trilogy. So he went off and did this big sword and sorcery franchise. And this is kind of like the lower budgeted version of Steven Kostanski's turn, like Peter Jackson made with Lord of the Rings. And, there's definitely nods and stuff in here that feels very Lord of the Rings. You can't really make a fantasy film without feeling Lord of the Rings inspired in some way or another, since almost all fantasy was inspired by Lord of the Rings in some capacity. But, this obviously is much, much more R-rated and gore-filled. And as far as that side of thing goes, it's, of course, delivers as one would expect. You have incredible creature design, lower budgeted stuff, but still so impressive. If you are a fan of indie filmmaking and really fun, imaginative, practical effects, both creature design and gore and whatnot, if you've seen his previous films, right, that's another thing to take in consideration here. Are you a fan of his previous work? If you've seen his other stuff and you're like, oh, this stuff's not for me, then yeah, maybe this won't win you over. But if you're a fan of his work and you know what to expect with it, you're going to be very pleased with all of the on-screen gore. I mean, there's heads being chopped in half, chopped off, bodies being torn apart. I mean, all practical, all on screen, all amazing. And I can't help but love it. Now, the guy who plays Deathstalker, Daniel Bernard, I think is his name, or Bernhard, however you say that. He is good. He's definitely likable, and you know, I still love the guy from part two. He's probably my favorite Deathstalker, just because that movie's so silly and so fun and so ridiculous. One element of this movie that I was a bit bummed with, but I'm not honestly that surprised because I don't feel like we've gotten almost any in other Kostansky films. So this might just not be his brand. But Deathstalker films are known for something alongside of, like, you know, buff dudes wielding swords and killing people, is a lot of like hot naked babes all over the screen. I mean, gratuitous amounts. If you watch 1 and 2, there's a scene in part 1 where there's just naked chicks everywhere, right? They're being thrown at the big beastly freaking warrior dudes, and you know, that's just kind of what comes with the territory with these types of things. They're exploitation films. They're meant to appeal to a certain audience, and there was an expectation with that, and they always seem to meet it. And this one has no nudity, nothing like that. The girl that he does meet, she's not a love interest of his, probably because she's literally less than half his age. Or more than half his age. Yeah, more than half his age, sorry. And yeah, she's very cute, very adorable, but there's no sexuality with her. There's no nudity, there's no nothing. And then as far as like, there's almost no other women in the film, and maybe except for like 1 or 2 that are very, very small characters. So that was a bit of a bummer, but not one that I'm that surprised by. So as far as like that homage or side of Deathstalker, that is not there at all. So a bit of a bummer, but that being said, there's so much to enjoy here with just to look at all of the imaginative, wonderful effects. That was really the joy of all of this, right? You got Patton Oswalt as well doing the voice of his little sidekick, Doodad, and he has some fun moments. You know, it is very indie. It is very low budget, but man, they really are able to use all of that budget on screen. I can only assume that he put every cent that he was given on this screen. And there's definitely inspirations all over the place. I saw there's a big fight between 2 characters at the end that is straight out of Big Trouble in Little China. You've got nods to Ray Harryhausen and the old like Clash of the Titans type style of clay, like the stop motion kind of animations type stuff that they used on those types of films. Jason and the Argonauts and whatnot. That was cool to see. There was a couple little creatures that were towards the end that actually reminded me of the little things that come out of Freddy in Freddy's Dead. So yeah, I mean, there's inspiration all over the place, you know. And then of course, you've got this kind of heavy metal soundtrack that accompanies it, and Deathstalker does get his own theme song, his own metal theme song that plays during the end credits. So yeah, I mean, kind of all the things you would really want to see, minus the nudity, unfortunately. I mean, that would have definitely made this a better experience for me personally. But the film is still a totally worthwhile time, good time, and one that I am happy with. I mean, I just can't tell you how many awesome effects there were throughout. I mean, just so much to look at all the time. And some of it felt like it came from a Jim Henson production. There's a 2-headed like troll that straight up looks like something from like The Dark Crystal or Labyrinth or something. That kind of stuff is always so cool to see, even if it can't really rival the believability, right, of some of the more polished effects of modern cinema. There's still such a love put into the craft of these practicals, and there's a nostalgia feel to seeing them, even if they do look kind of silly. And that's just it. This is silly, right? This is a silly film. You know, if I was to liken this to something sword and sorcery like, I would say Conan the Destroyer, right? For those of you who know the Conan franchise, there's only like 2 films and a remake, but the original one's really dark, It's it's dreary. And then the sequel is more like PG-13, kind of fun, lighthearted, and that's what this feels like. But if you took that R-rated, right, it's more playful. The characters are cracking jokes, that kind of stuff, winks and nods. So yeah, if you are a fan of exploitation style, sword and sorcery, Deathstalker, films, and you like Kostanski's work, I think you'll be pleased. If that does not sound fun to you at all, there's a reason Kaylee's not sitting next to me, because it's definitely not the kind of film that she would be interested in. I still think she would really, really appreciate the effects, though. I don't know how you couldn't, but regardless, I think it's a damn good time and a welcomed addition to Kostanski's growing filmography that is very impressive. I respect the hell out of the guy, and I look forward to what he brings us next. So yeah, maybe Deathstalker 2, and this time with nudity. Deathstalker 2 with nudity. There you go. There's a tagline. All right, guys. I'll see you in the comments. Adios.